There is a patent filed with the United States Patent Office on August 11, 1942. Patent number 2,465,943. The inventors are listed as Hedy Lamarr and George Antheil. The patent describes a system for frequency-hopping spread spectrum communication, a method of transmitting radio signals by rapidly switching between frequencies in a sequence known only to the transmitter and the receiver, making the signal impossible to intercept or jam. The patent was filed during the Second World War to protect Allied torpedoes from Nazi interference. It was ignored by the United States Navy. It was classified and locked away. When it was finally declassified, the patent had expired. The inventors received nothing. Hedy Lamarr received nothing. You know her by a different name. Hedy Lamarr, the woman MGM called the most beautiful woman in the world. The woman whose face launched 1,000 magazine covers and whose name was synonymous with a particular kind of devastating, decorative, foreign femininity. The woman whose invention is the direct ancestor of the technology inside every Wi-Fi router, every Bluetooth device, every mobile phone on Earth. Hollywood knew about the patent. Hollywood had one response. They told her to focus on her looks. Hedwig Eva Maria Kiesler was born on November 9, 1914, in Vienna, Austria. Her father was a bank director. Her mother was a pianist. They were Jewish, cultured, prosperous, the kind of Viennese family that moved through the city's intellectual and artistic circles with ease. Hedwig was their only child. She was extraordinarily beautiful from the time she was a small girl, in the way that sometimes makes life easier and sometimes makes it unbearable, depending entirely on who is doing the looking. From her father, she inherited something less visible but more durable: an engineering mind. Emil Kiesler spent hours with his daughter explaining how things worked: the mechanics of printing presses, the operation of streetcars, the principles behind everyday machines that most people used without thinking. Hedwig thought about everything. She could not encounter a mechanism without wanting to understand it, could not identify a problem without immediately constructing possible solutions. At 16, she was enrolled in a drama school in Vienna and discovered she was a natural actress. At 17, she was cast in a Czech film called Ecstasy. At 18, she was the most scandalous actress in Europe. Ecstasy, released in 1933, contained scenes that no major studio film had shown before. Hedwig Kiesler appeared without clothing. In 1933 Europe, this was enough to make the film notorious across the continent. It was banned in several countries. Pope Pius XI condemned it publicly. The notoriety made Hedwig Kiesler famous in the particular way that scandal produces fame: loud, widespread, and entirely disconnected from anything she had actually done. She had appeared in a film. What people discussed was her body. What they did not discuss was her acting. What nobody discussed at all was the thing she was doing in her spare time. She was studying engineering. Quietly, privately, reading technical manuals and scientific papers with the same intensity she brought to scripts. At 19, she made the first catastrophic mistake of her life. She married Friedrich Mandl. Friedrich Mandl was 33 years old, one of the wealthiest men in Austria and one of the most dangerous. He was an arms manufacturer. He supplied weapons to Mussolini and Franco and conducted business with representatives of the Nazi government, which was, in 1933, still assembling itself in Germany. He was also fanatically possessive. He bought every copy of Ecstasy he could locate and attempted to have the film destroyed. He required Hedwig to accompany him to every business dinner, every meeting, every social engagement. She sat beside him while he discussed weapons technology with some of the most dangerous men in Europe. She listened. She was 20 years old and the most beautiful woman in any room she entered, and nobody looked past her face long enough to notice that she was paying attention to everything. Friedrich Mandl noticed eventually. He began locking her in the house. He hired staff to monitor her movements. He controlled what she read and who she spoke to and what she was permitted to think about. He had married a decoration and was confused and furious when the decoration turned out to have a mind. In 1937, Hedwig Kiesler drugged her maid, borrowed her uniform, and walked out of her husband's mansion. She made her way to Paris, then to London, where she contrived to be on the same ship as Louis B. Mayer. Louis B. Mayer was crossing the Atlantic in 1937 on his way back to Hollywood. Hedwig Kiesler arranged an introduction. She spoke to him about her career, her ambitions, her desire to work in American film. Mayer was not immediately interested. She was European. Her most famous film was a scandal. Her name was unpronounceable. She was also standing in front of him on the deck of an ocean liner, so extraordinarily beautiful that Louis B. Mayer understood immediately what she could be used for. He offered her a contract, $125 a week. She held out for $500. She got it. He renamed her Hedy Lamarr, after Barbara Lamarr, a silent film actress who had died young and beautiful and tragic, the kind of name that came with a story already built in. Hedwig Kiesler agreed to it and boarded a plane to Los Angeles. She was 23 years old. She had escaped one man who wanted to own her face. She had just signed a contract with another. MGM's plan for Hedy Lamarr was simple. She would be beautiful. She would be exotic. She would be foreign in the way that American audiences found simultaneously thrilling and unthreatening. Dark hair, high cheekbones, an accent that placed her somewhere vaguely European and therefore vaguely mysterious. She would play temptresses and villains and femmes fatales, women whose primary function on screen was to be looked at and to complicate the lives of American men. The studio put her in Algiers in 1938 opposite Charles Boyer. The film was a success. Fan mail arrived in quantities that surprised even MGM. The studio's publicity department went to work. They produced a biography of Hedy Lamarr that emphasized her beauty, her European origins, her escape from a dangerous marriage, her arrival in Hollywood. The biography did not mention engineering. The biography did not mention the hours she spent at the drafting table in her home in Benedict Canyon. The biography did not mention the inventor's kit she kept in her dressing room at the MGM lot, which she worked on between takes. Nobody at MGM had asked about the inventor's kit. Nobody thought to ask. The inventor's kit was not a hobby. Hedy Lamarr had been thinking seriously about weapons technology since she was 19 years old and sitting beside Friedrich Mandl at dinners, where men discussed the vulnerabilities of radio-controlled torpedoes. She had listened to those conversations with the mind her father had spent her childhood building. She had understood what the men around the table were saying. She had also identified what they were missing. By 1940, when she had been in Hollywood for 3 years and the Second World War had begun, and Nazi submarines were destroying Allied shipping in the Atlantic at a rate that was threatening to decide the outcome of the conflict, Hedy Lamarr had a solution. She had identified the core problem. Radio-controlled torpedoes could be detected and jammed. The Nazis could intercept the signal, override the guidance system, and redirect the weapon. The solution was to make the signal impossible to intercept. which meant making it impossible to predict, which meant making it hop between frequencies in a pattern that the receiver knew, but that any interceptor could not anticipate. Frequency hopping spread spectrum. She could not implement it alone. She needed someone who understood signal patterns well enough to help her design the frequency sequencing mechanism. She found him at a dinner party in Hollywood. His name was George Antheil. He was an avant-garde composer who had spent years working with player pianos, mechanisms that could produce complex synchronized patterns automatically. Exactly the kind of mechanism that could drive a frequency hopping system. They worked together in the evenings at her home in Benedict Canyon, while MGM photographed her for magazine covers, while the fan mail arrived about her face, while the studio planned her next picture and her next publicity campaign and her next appearance at a premiere in a gown that would generate the right number of column inches. She was inventing something in her spare time that would change the world. On August 11, 1942, Hedy Lamarr and George Antheil received United States patent number 2,465,943. They donated it to the United States Navy. They asked nothing for it. They wanted to help win the war. The Navy reviewed it. The Navy classified it. The Navy locked it away. The official reason, recorded in naval correspondence from the period, was that the mechanism was too bulky for practical implementation. The patent sat in a filing cabinet for 20 years. When it was declassified in 1962, the patent term had expired. Hedy Lamarr owned nothing. The technology went into the public domain. Here is what happened next. The principles described in patent number 2,465,943 became the foundation of spread spectrum communication technology, which became the foundation of CDMA, code division multiple access, which is the technology underlying every mobile phone network on Earth, which is the technology underlying Wi-Fi, which is the technology underlying Bluetooth, which is the technology underlying GPS. Every time you make a phone call, connect to a wireless network, use a navigation system, or listen to wireless audio, you are using a direct descendant of the system that Hedy Lamarr designed at a drafting table in Benedict Canyon, while MGM photographed her face for magazine covers. The total economic value of the industries built on her invention is incalculable. She received nothing. For most of her life, nobody knew. MGM dropped Hedy Lamarr in 1951. She was 36 years old. The studio that had built her image had decided she was too old. They did not renew her contract. She made independent films for a few more years. None of them were successful. By the mid-1950s, Hedy Lamarr had largely disappeared from public view. She had been married 6 times. She had 3 children. She had a patent that nobody knew about. She was living in a series of increasingly modest circumstances. The fortune that MGM had generated during her peak years largely spent on the marriages and the productions and the life that a studio contract had required her to maintain. In 1966, she was arrested for shoplifting in Los Angeles. The charges were eventually dropped. The incident was covered by every major newspaper in America. The coverage focused entirely on the fact that the most beautiful woman in the world had been caught stealing. Nobody mentioned the patent. In 1997, the Electronic Frontier Foundation awarded Hedy Lamarr and George Antheil their Pioneer Award for the invention of frequency hopping spread spectrum technology. Hedy Lamarr was 82 years old. She was living in Florida, largely reclusive, in poor health. When she was told about the award, she said a sentence that has been quoted in every account of this story since. She said, "It's about time." She accepted the award by telephone. She was too ill to attend the ceremony in person. George Antheil had died in 1959. He never knew. In 2014, the year of her centenary, Hedy Lamarr was inducted into the National Inventors Hall of Fame. She had been dead for 14 years. The cruel irony that history placed at the end of Hedy Lamarr's story is this. She spent 20 years trying to be taken seriously as an actress. She spent another 20 years being ignored as an inventor. The thing that MGM valued, her face, faded the way all faces fade. The thing MGM ignored, her mind, built the communications infrastructure of the modern world. Every device in your pocket is running on her work. The studio that owned her image for 13 years generated no technology that anyone uses today. The actress they told to focus on her looks generated technology that every human being on Earth uses every day. She died in 2000. She was 85 years old. She died in her apartment in Castleberry, Florida. Alone, largely forgotten by the industry that had consumed her face and discarded the rest. The Wi-Fi signal in the building where she died was running on her patent. She never got $1 of it. Did you know that Hedy Lamarr invented the technology behind your phone? Tell me in the comments what you think should have happened differently.